My companies have, never been in direct product marketing for commercial sales. But of course, a startup company, does marketing as well. It markets its technology, its innovation, its patents, its know-how. You have to go out to conferences, to industry conferences in order to make yourself known in the industry. And in those conferences, which are especially set up for startup companies, for investors, they usually also have meeting systems where meetings between investors and startup founders are being organized. Those are events that you have to attend in order to get yourself known in the industry. This is marketing in a sense, marketing for getting yourself known in the investors community, potentially in the industry, because there are three stakeholders in the industry. There are bigger pharma companies looking to in-license interesting technologies or products. There are investors looking for projects that they can fund. And then there are the startup companies who can cater to both of these groups. So there's an ecosystem out there where, of course, certain matchmaking needs to take place. And this matchmaking usually happens at industry conferences. There are the global bio conferences, and bio stands for Biotechnology Industry Organization. The bio conferences are usually in big cities in the United States in summer, but there are also the Bio Europe conferences that happen in spring and in fall each year in different European countries. So those are bigger conferences with, in the United States, more than 10, sometimes 20,000 delegates coming to these conferences. And this usually then includes big pharma, biotech, and also startup companies and investors, although at the bio conferences, investors tend to be a little bit less represented at the bio conferences because they are specialized conferences where startup companies meet up with investors. There is one in Europe, which is quite famous, the Bioequity Conference that happens once per year in a European city, where there are intense meetings and projects are being presented to investors. There's, of course, the famous JP Morgan conference in January of each year in San Francisco, which at a certain point of time, when you're in fundraising, I would say not in seed financing, but certainly at Series A financing and further, one should actually go there as well. Interestingly, the JP Morgan conference is happening only in a small conference hotel with invited guests. And at most JP Morgan conferences, I've never been an invited guest, but there are 30, 40,000 people from the biopharma industry around in town in January of each year. And then there are plenty of meetings that are happening outside of the official conference schedule. The pharma companies have actually hotel suites and rooms and whole floors booked for meetings, partnering meetings with other companies or investors alike. So this is where you can achieve a lot of networking and meeting people from the industry. Then, of course, you have specialized conferences which you can attend for certain therapy indications. I outline here the ones in oncology. There are international conferences of the American Society for Clinical Oncology, ASCO, or the European Society for Medical Oncology, ESMO. So these are big conferences where lots of medical doctors meet with companies. There are also patient advocacy groups. Even investors are looking there because new projects are being presented in poster sessions, in meetings. Clinical data from companies, from ongoing clinical trials are being presented. And again, those are companies where you have 20, 30,000 delegates participating. This is has more of a clinical focus, but if you're in drug development, if you move your products towards clinical validation, those are conferences that must-be conferences as well. So that determines more or less kind of a marketing calendar for each startup company. And if you don't attend those conferences, you're missing on a lot of networking opportunities, and people just won't notice you. Even if you have a website, and of course that's another marketing tool that is extremely important for each startup company. A website is kind of the first point of contact where anyone, any stakeholder, any investor can learn something about your company, the team, the technology, the products, the plans, the vision of the company. So that needs to be out there as a almost business card for the company. I think that's nowadays a must. Although I have to say, I've seen biotech companies who ran in stealth mode for 1 to 2 years, and where the website was, well, website will come soon. But that usually means that then the companies are extremely well funded already by a venture capital company, and they just don't want to disclose to the public what they are doing. But if you're looking for funds, if you try to, well, get yourself known, market your technologies, which means, I mean, getting yourself known with pharma companies, larger companies with whom you could collaborate or who could be potential business partners, you have to attend the conferences, you have to have a decent website. And those are the marketing tools that are essential for each startup company, I guess. At all of these conferences, except maybe for the clinical ones, there are special meeting systems in place by the conference producers, where you actually start preparing for scheduling meeting with delegates who register for the conference about 3 months to 2 months ahead of the meeting. So you go to these conferences usually with 20 to 40 meetings pre-scheduled, and those are 30-minute speed dating meetings in special meeting booths, all facilitated by a software system um, behind the conference. And this is where you can meet with a lot of companies in 2 or 3 days time frame, which also means that you start at 9 o'clock in the morning with your first meeting and you end at 5 or 6 in the evening. So that way you have 10 to 15 meetings per day of 30 minutes each. Usually only 1 or 2 of those per day are meetings that lead to a reasonable follow-up afterwards. And this is then the next thing that you have to do. You have to do the follow-up with the partners you have met at the conferences, because if you don't follow up, essentially it is as if you have never met these people. So follow-up is absolutely essential. So this is what the task is of traditionally the business development function in a company. They have to make sure that one makes the best use of the time in going to these conferences, especially at the big bio conferences, of course, especially if you're around a little bit longer. A lot of the colleagues go to special, after event parties, either organized by big pharma companies or sponsors of the conferences, sometimes by the bio organization itself. You can have a chat over a beverage, and this is what is essential in networking. So usually these conferences, especially the bio conferences, are very intense, and from the first moment, and maybe even the evening before the official program starts until the last day, you have your day program of meetings, you have your evening social events. Some of them are by invitation only, so you have to somehow know someone who gets you into these conferences. And this is how you build your network and get yourself known and your project known. Because at the end, this is a showcase for all of the new and existing and maybe old projects. But very often, this is the beginning of a business partnership. It is the beginning of a financing round. In some cases, this might be kind of the last wrap-up, because especially at JP Morgan conference, all of the venture capital companies come with their whole investment teams, and it's a chance to meet with all of them in one meeting, which is almost impossible during a normal work schedule. So one has to know these essential conferences, and these are the marketing activities which are necessary to get yourself onto the map of the industry, of industry stakeholders, of investors. And this is what marketing is about, of a pre-selling, a pre-revenue company, where you are marketing to investors, to potential partners for in and out licensing. not everybody can go. So it should be the senior leadership team of the company, the management team. So for the bio conferences, JP Morgan, the CEO should go, maybe the chief scientific officer, and then the meeting should be together. Potentially, if it's more investors related, the chief financial officer or a person who takes care of the finance or the fundraising. So I would say between these four people, the executive officer, business officer, finance officer, technical or scientific officer, those are the functions that should present. Ideally, of course, a co-founder can come along. Ideally, the co-founder should be part of the management of the company, but if this is not the case, a very experienced, let's say, scientific co-founder who is still in academia could also come along, because they can explain with their credibility and their track record in the field how relevant things are. So it's usually between 2 and 4 people who should go to these conferences. Then one can also split up and potentially have meetings in parallel with different companies taking place at the same time. Of course, you sell your product or kind of your technology, which may not exist physically, and that you cannot present as a tangible item or piece that people can touch, simply in presentations about your technology, about your drug, which essentially means that you present the data that you either have generated from non-clinical research before you go into the clinic, or ideally from clinical research once you have started clinical trials. And these data sets are then the ones that you present to potential interested parties. So it's data that you present. So the data is the currency that you present at these conferences. It's not something, well, depends, of course. If you have a certain drug that needs a special device, and you can present that device and can make it credible that this is the solution, how you apply the drug, then of course you can bring that along as well. But usually a picture and a PowerPoint presentation will do as well. And then you have 30-minute meeting slots that are prearranged before these conferences, which means that you shouldn't bring more than 10 to 15 slides that you can go through, but you do not need to go through. You can also talk about your innovation, your product. It's also about establishing kind of a relationship of trust. And this is how you build your credibility, your network, how you get yourself known. And sometimes it's, again, not a fit in terms of time and development stage, but then you can pick up on these earlier contacts in next year's meeting or in a meeting 2 years down the road. So this is all about establishing yourself as a player in the industry, and making yourself a company that everyone needs to know at some point of time and needs to consider, so that you come into a prime position when it comes to negotiating deals. Absolutely, yeah. We have used PR firms in the past, and we are using them in the present. Usually that investment, of course, is not cheap, because these guys have to make a living themselves. And I think you get more impact or more results out of engaging a PR expert or PR consultant in a later stage of company development, because then there's really enough content that can be focused or that can be steered towards a certain message, or positioning can be refined, considering what the competition does. So at the very early beginning, I think stakeholders, including investors, rather believe what you as a founder tell investors or early stakeholders, rather than a PR company that comes with completely polished messages, because then the authenticity is lost. A spin-off from an academic research group, all being scientists, has the tendency that presentation material is very technical and very technical oriented. Of course, here a PR agency could be helpful, but in my experience, they are more helpful at a later stage of time. And investors forgive, I think, scientific founders that they are technical to some extent, if it's not too nerdy. And they are experts themselves. So I think it's better to stay authentic and rather live with the deficiency of maybe not the perfect presentation and PR package, but then working with these guys a little bit further down the road. In our industry, I think one of the biggest social media impact that you can get is on LinkedIn. That in our industry is the social media where all biotech pharma companies are present, consulting companies. So you have to have a LinkedIn page, like you have to have a web page almost on LinkedIn, so that you can post a few things around that you're attending a conference, who is coming, or maybe some opinion about anything. But that means that you have to have some PR strategy there as well, not to overload your followers, your community. But I mean, LinkedIn is certainly one social media channel that you need to, or has a high relevance in our industry. I think it's not an absolute must, but it's helpful. Yeah, I guess the other social media, which you know from privates, are not so relevant, like Facebook, Instagram. I think is not for biotech companies, but LinkedIn is very much on the biopharma side and has big networks there. Advertising that a company is based in Switzerland certainly has a positive impact, especially in the biopharmaceutical industry. Interestingly, well, some of the biggest pharma companies are coming from Switzerland. I mean, we have Novartis and Roche here in Switzerland. Actually, if you take both of these companies together, it would be the largest pharma company in the world. And they account for 10% of the global prescription pharmaceutical market. So one could really say Switzerland is a pharmacy of the world in a way. And it's not only Novartis and Roche. Again, I don't want to advertise things here too much, but the large representation of global pharma companies in Switzerland is really that you can use as a startup company to your advantage as well, because research and development, including the development of drugs in Switzerland, is internationally highly renowned. So Switzerland counts as a country with a high innovation. It's not only in the company environment. I think each year there's a publication about the innovation index. Globally, Switzerland ranks number one for the last 20 years, I believe, in terms of patent applications being filed per capita, but also in terms of patent applications that eventually are being granted, so useful patent applications. And that positively reflects also on startup companies active in this area. And this is not only because they are geographically located in Switzerland, but also because there is an interplay between the people working in large pharma companies and smaller companies. So especially in, the northwestern part of Switzerland, where Roche and Novartis is located, the startup companies that start in this area benefit from people who have pharma experience, drug development experience, and may actually want to transfer to a startup company. So you can get very well educated and very versed professionals from the industry that you can engage in your startup company. So this, in combination with, anyhow, the excellent infrastructure, the support for companies from, I would say, administration, government side. So things are relatively easy and straightforward to start a company. There are fantastic legal counsels around. There are tax experts and advisors, auditing companies. So I think Switzerland has a fantastic national resource, and this is the innovation and the knowledge how to set up companies. And a relatively, let's say, low admin system of doing this in comparison to some other countries in Europe that I don't want to name specifically, where things are much more complex. And I know this from own experience. So I think this is something that makes Switzerland highly attractive also for international investors. So not only for Swiss investors, but also for international investors. And therefore, I think the Swissness factor for a startup company is something that works absolutely to the benefit for the reasons that I mentioned. Well, the biggest learning really wasn't, I think it was the transition from the first company to the second company, is that it makes absolute sense to be very early on outspoken about the innovation and the technology you're working on, what the solution is, and not being afraid that you actually give guidance to the competition. This may help. I think I've said that before. May help the competition, of course, to to copy you or to go after you or to steal your innovation. On the other hand, I always thought it was a compliment if one of our competitors all of a sudden had the same message on the website that we had already propagated in meetings or that we have on our website as well. And the competition may copy you regardless whether you're outspoken or not about the solution that you're offering. I think another advantage of being outspoken about it is that you show your competitors that you are there already in a certain area and maybe a year or 1.5 years ahead of them. And that actually might shy them away from going exactly into the area that you are offering as a solution. So I think it's a double-edged sword. It has the potential threat, of course, that you educate your competitors, but my experience has been over the years, and actually the experience from the first company where we were very cagey, where we were secretive about what we were doing, and then we became very outspoken to the second company, that actually people realized these guys are already there, they have the solution, we don't need to go there. Except for one company in China that tried to do exactly what we were doing. Having said that, one has to be very careful that larger companies who have a lot of resources, of course, can potentially overtake you. So one has to be mindful also not to tell all secrets in public, but at least, to provide enough detail that people understand that you are already fully on track and that things are working, especially when things are working, that you basically say, well, this is all established, here are the data, so that people see that if they have to catch up with this, it will take them quite a long time. Yeah, maybe another learning in this context is also, I mean, if you're always afraid of telling in the public what your innovation is, what you're working on, of course, always after you have filed patent applications, because whatever you present in public presentations, even at conferences, it's amazing to see patent offices pulling out these documents from conference producers where you think, how on the world do they get access to these documents? So, of course, one should never present anything that is part of an unpublished patent application or a patent application that is still work in progress. So only after you have filed a patent application and therefore you have the priority on the data, then of course you can go out and advertise that. So what struck me also is that, I mean, if you think about larger organizations and pharma companies who could simply copy you because they have many more resources and they could maybe make faster progress, they have a little bit the not invented here syndrome, and maybe also the larger companies would have many committees before they need to decide that they are going after a particular technology that a smaller company is pursuing. For them, it's much easier to start a discussion and about in-licensing rather than building things themselves that they haven't invented themselves. Of course, if you touch upon a technology that they are working on as well and you're very close, then of course they might take your results and move this forward a little bit faster. That is, of course, a danger, so you should know your competition. But let's say if you're really on something that is very new, very disruptive, very unlikely that a big pharma company just picks it up by themselves before they even realize in their teams that this is something they should pursue. I mean, you're 3 years ahead. So I think there's little risk that you lose your true innovation to a pharma company simply by being outspoken about it. There's more value in getting yourself known in the industry. And pharma companies, I mean, they're honorable, maybe not each and every time, and not each and every person. It's like in society, but they are honorable organizations. They rather engage in licensing discussions and acquire this with the full know-how, especially if it comes from academia. I mean, they cannot easily catch up 5-6 years of an excellent academic group with their own researchers in-house. So you have an advantage if your innovation is built on 10 years of academic research. How in the world can they pick this up in 1 or 2 years' time? European startup companies, when they go out and present themselves, they're very conservative and very, let's say, data-oriented and data-driven. So they have this very high aspiration to present factual information and data that are validated 3 times and absolutely true, well, true on the basis of whatever data has been associated with it. I have the feeling that, and now in contrast, American companies and American management teams seem to be a little bit more on the selling side before they have something to sell. So selling kind of the idea and the vision, convincing investors and stakeholders that they can implement it, and that they have the management capabilities to, well, make miracles. I think the European companies are less believing in miracles, but in data. And while I'm also European at heart with this, and also rather like to present the hard facts and what is essentially established and what kind of data you have validated and you can confidently present, I think there's an element in there that is required in order to attract larger investments to, well, without completely overselling, to take a little bit this attitude, we will manage it. And we will find the solution, even if it's not yet there. But let's say in presentations to investors, I think American management teams are, I would say, a little bit, I shouldn't say aggressive, maybe a little bit more outspoken about what they can achieve and what kind of capabilities they have. And even if the Europeans have the same capabilities, they're a little less outspoken about this, and put themselves behind the data. So, I mean, this is a well-known fact in the industry. And sometimes, especially European investors who have an US background, they say the Europeans should lose their inferiority complex and they are as good as American companies and should really be proud about this and not hold back so much.